Okay, we've started.
We're live?
No, we're committed.
you guys. I do love you guys, though.
We're just glad we're here with you, Kamarr.
Yes. Sometimes it's mutual.
Occasionally, not every time. Certainly not every time.
So this is episode, I think, 8. I really should probably start looking to see what episode number we are in before. I've so far been
It's
pretty
7
accurate.
or 8. It's got to be 7 or 8.
Yeah, it's one of those.
It's up there.
It's one of those. If you have not been reading through the book, been coming through some hard times, I know that I've come across a number of people who have been reading it. Due to this, we are getting no royalties. Probably should have marketed that better.
That would have been nice.
Hindsight being what it is.
Yeah, but it is definitely a book worth reading. And chapter 4 is, again, like you guys see all my sticky notes. It's another 3-episode one. You know, he has no markings in his.
Yeah.
We established that before, right?
We did. We've covered it.
We both treat our books like our bodies.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
That's
Yes.
exactly it. But chapter 4 is another long, serious one.
Right.
I mean, I guess the whole book is. And it's called Free But Not Equal. And I wanted to, like I told you guys before, I want to read this first sentence because I think it's an interesting point that he's making. He says, institutionalized social and economic inequality for a century after emancipation betrayed the ideals of freedom and the postbellum constitutional guarantees that black people believed were theirs. So it's a lot of fancy words.
Right.
And I wrote in my margin, I'm like, this is a longer way of saying systemic racism, essentially. And so I think that's a good place for us to start because I know that's controversial in of itself.
It is.
For whatever reason, it's controversial to say systemic racism is real.
Yeah. Depends on who you talk to.
Depends on who you're talking to, but just in society, in America right now, that's a controversy.
In the evangelical world.
Well, yes, especially.
Yeah.
But even outside, like, I mean, I've had conversations with non-Christians of different colors who will have different views on this.
Right.
And so I guess I don't want to pin us down and say so that, you know, our respective churches, you know, throw rocks at us. I'm not going to say be pinned down and say, is systemic racism real or not? Why or why not? None of that. But rather I want to say, like, what should the Christian response be if people are saying there's a system of evil that is hurting people?
Right. You know, I like to take, and I think we've kind of went through this before, but I like to take, you know, the thought, if someone's hurting and I'm a Christian, I need to legitimize their hurt or their pain, or if they see something in society that I don't see and it causes my brother to have some sort of pain in this world, then I think that it's my role as a believer. I need to legitimize his pain. Otherwise, I'm just gaslighting. And I'm saying, you know what? I don't see that. You're just blowing this over. You just have a chip on your shoulder. I don't think that's a way that Christian brothers and sisters are supposed to respond to things. So, for example, in first century, you know, Palestine, if I walk down the street and I feel like the local magistrate is being rough on me because I'm a believer, if I go back to my brothers and sisters in Christ and they say, oh, you're just reading into it, it's not that big of a deal, I don't think that's the Christian way. I don't think that's the way that we're supposed to handle things. I think we're supposed to say, you know, brother, I'm so sorry you feel that way, brother. Let's pray together about this. You know, even if I don't see it myself, I have to legitimize the fact that you feel that way.
Yeah. What about you, Brandon? Because again, I'm not, for people who are, I know we getting, especially you guys more than me. I don't know why nobody complains to me, but I know that sometimes we say things, and I especially apparently say things that are incendiary or whatever.
Not you. No.
Yeah,
Can't imagine.
But I'm not trying to make this a hard, controversial thing of people getting upset. But like, I mean, so remove the politics, remove even ethnicity from it, and just like, what should be the response, the Christian response of somebody saying, "Hey, they're out to get me. They are hurting me. There's a system in place, and it's causing me pain." What should be the Christian response to that? Whether they're telling the truth or not, whether they are delusional or correct, like what should be our response?
Well, I think about the response of Christ, looking just at his circle of disciples, looking at who he brought into his declaration of the kingdom, who he trained up to then be the carriers out of that. You know, he's got a zealot over here, he's got a tax collector over here. Talk about strange bedfellows.
Yeah,
right.
You know, and at some point, the concerns that were utmost for Matthew were radically different than they would have been for somebody else, somebody who's
Great
with
point.
somebody who's with the Romans and somebody who is committed to not having the Romans at all.
That's a great point.
And Jesus found a way to say to both of them, my kingdom matters to you.
Yeah.
You matter to the kingdom. And so in some way, shape, or form, that conversation happened where Jesus was able to engage with this broad range of people.
That's great.
I don't know that I would use the word legitimize, right? But at least recognize.
Yeah.
I don't know that we want to say we're going to legitimize everybody's pain, everybody's sense of this, but we do want to at least acknowledge and empathize. I thought how you said it was great. I'm sorry you feel that way. Let's pray about it. Legitimize is you're absolutely right. You should feel that way, and I would hesitate to say legitimize.
And I think I legitimize their thoughts and their concerns or their fears.
Yeah.
And I love how you say that. If Matthew is walking with a group of the disciples and they're going through the Decapolis, they're going through these cities, and then there's people, and let's say that Matthew's walking in the back and people are spitting on him.
Yeah.
Okay. And he's like, dudes, I think we need to go to another town. This town is not welcoming. And they're in the front and they're not getting spit on.
No, what are you talking about? Food's great here.
Yeah, they're so nice. They're shaking my hand. Well, he's a former tax collector.
Right.
They probably recognize him. They're treating him some kind of a way. And what kind of love and brotherhood would it be if they turn around and say, oh, just be quiet. You don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the way that would have went.
Yeah.
Right.
I will say too, speaking what you're talking about, recognizing, legitimizing, I think one of the things that's important for bridging that, and that's what we're going to get into, at least in this episode, is understanding history. So much of, especially when we talk about this idea of systemic racism, or is there this thing that exists, it has to do with history and the way people understand it and know it and view it.
Yeah.
Something that I know that came out early on with you and I is that there were things that you didn't know about historically.
Oh, yeah.
And it goes both ways. Like there were relevant things about the history of Idaho that I don't know. And if I lived there...
There's not a great many of those things, but there are those things.
But there are, and especially if I were living in a community, like say we're back in Idaho, and we're living in a community there where this history is relevant, and I'm walking through it, and I'm ignorant of this, and you came up to me and you said, hey, Kamarr, you probably shouldn't say that. I then have to decide what I do with that. So this came, I was talking with Cal, who was our friend over in Poland this morning. I was reminded that happened. We were in Poland and we were doing something. We were in a convenience store. I think they needed sunblock or something like that. And we were looking at different things, and we were noticing how all the stuff was in Russian, right? And I had a moment of just being dumb and saying dumb things. And because, I have a lot of those, I know. But we're looking at it, and I think some of the effect was like, my wife was like, why is everything in Russian here? And I said something like oh, because Russian's great. And like, oh. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, like as a joke with sarcasm.
You said that recently.
Yeah, I said that recently in Poland. And so we walk out.
Like this year.
Yeah. And Cal corrected me. He's like, hey, Kamarr, I know what you meant with sarcasm and things like that. He said, but you gotta understand, sometimes things don't translate. You need to understand that there are people here that a statement like that would really hurt. And that could actually sincerely hurt our ability to even reach them with Jesus.
Right.
I need you to understand that. Mm-hmm. I had to decide in that moment, is this going to be like forget you, man, I'm telling jokes and this is fun, or man, I messed up. Right. I was essentially, for lack of a better word, I was racially and culturally insensitive in that moment.
Right.
And I was being corrected by my brother. Right. What do I do with that?
Right.
I think that's the reality of it is how do we deal with that when we're confronted with these things? And so one of the things that this chapter brings up is segregation, the history of segregation here in this community. It says right here, the white race is dominant in Kentucky, which
is a quote. It's a quote from the gentleman who gets up and speaks.
Yes, yeah. But one of the things that stood out to me especially, so in this first paragraph especially, I have it underlined. Berea College, a private school, had for 5 decades existed as a successful but radical social experiment in interracial education. Until the Day Law declared integrated education, even if privately funded, illegal. Berea failed in its appeal to the Supreme Court to invalidate the Day Law. And so we have this Day Law, which existed because of a local to Hopkinsville.
Right.
Breathitt, he's got stuff named after him all throughout the state.
Here, what about in town?
I think there's a couple of things in town, but I know across the state, he's a famous politician.
Yeah.
And his big thing was segregation.
Yeah.
We got to make sure it's mandatory. In fact, so much so that even if you want to privately fund your institution, you're not allowed to be integrated.
Yeah. He didn't think it was just a politically good idea. He thought it was a moral and a natural good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was sold out for the cause of segregation.
He wasn't a hypocrite. He was at least sincere.
Yeah,
he was sincerely wrong, but he was sincere.
He was kind of like George Wallace of Kentucky, sort of.
Yeah, with your wonderful quote you were saying as we were getting ready.
Segregation then, segregation now, and segregation forever. That was George Wallace.
The funny thing, okay, so
not
with
Richard, just so we're clear.
Definitely not me.
So with that quote, with Breathitt and all that, like, in a way, Wallace wasn't wrong.
According to Breathitt.
Well, no, I mean his statement of segregation forever. Because think about why we're doing this. Think about Hopkinsville.
We're still talking
with
about
its 30-some-odd% black population.
Yeah.
I mean, think about, I don't even know what the percentage is right now for the Hispanic population. And like we have a substantial, sizable Japanese population. Are these ethnic groups largely segregated here in Hopkinsville?
Yeah.
Yes, they are.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about the day law. This goes back to 1904. George Wallace is in the 1960s, and now we're talking, what is that, 60 years later, we're still talking about it.
And we still have segregated communities in America. His heart was in the wrong place. We don't agree with his desire for it to be that way, but in a way, he wasn't wrong. It still is segregated here in America. We're still talking about it because we still have this segregation.
Don't you think that is just a part of the human experience, not just an American phenomenon, where like tends toward like, and that's kind of natural. And I think that some of the pushback that people give on talking about issues like this, some of the pushback that comes in when you start bringing up issues of race and integration and different things like that, a lot of that comes because people are like, well, it's just natural. It's just natural. And
I don't know if it is.
I don't agree with that.
You want to go first? Go ahead, because I disagree about it being natural, actually.
Yeah, you don't see it everywhere. I think there's some social engineering that takes place for those things to seemingly become natural. You look at apartheid in South America; those things were socially engineered. You could take colonialism. I don't think those things are naturally that way. Matter of fact, I just came back from the Dominican Republic, and it used to be known as a mulatto nation.
Yeah.
And people from, the shades all under the sun, from light to dark, and they get along fairly well until you start to research the history to find out why things are the way they are now. Well, when the U.S. government came to occupy that nation, there's actual literature that talks in history that talks about that the U.S. Marines came and sowed seeds of segregation into that country that bled into some of the hierarchy, which led into policies, which really you still see a lot of that today. Even though it's a very diverse community, there's a hierarchy based on color, but it wasn't natural.
Yeah.
It was planted, it was rooted, it was seeded with those kind of thoughts.
Yeah, let me clarify what I was saying there. I wasn't saying that this is right.
Yeah.
I'm saying that people look at that and they say, look, it's just natural that this is what happens. And it's that very mindset that is what this is attempting to say, okay, but just because it is doesn't mean it is natural. People see it and assume, oh, this is normal. And they say, this is natural. You see this everywhere. And I don't think that we do, first off. But then second, I know for a fact it's not compatible with the gospel.
Well, I was going to say, I think you're right that people say this seems natural. And I think within a sinful nature, it's natural. But when I think of really just how God designed everything, I mean, I think about our stance, our stance that we have as evangelical, at least conservative-leaning Christians when it comes to marriage. We say that the idea of sexual attraction, physical attraction, the natural is to be attracted to the opposite, the other. That's what's natural, not for it to be the same. And so I think that even when I look throughout nature, is that, I find that naturally you are you're drawn to the other because that makes you healthier. That makes you more complete and more whole. That brings balance to everything. And so this inclination that says I have to be with somebody, I have to be segregated, I have to be separated, really is the unnatural from the created, natural, perfect world that God made.
Yes.
Because you don't see that in the animal kingdom.
No.
I mean, it's natural. In the animal kingdom, just, dogs like dogs. They don't care if they're spotted dogs or brown dogs or white dogs. They just, hey, you're a dog, I'm a dog, let's do dog things.
And they don't even completely stay just with other dogs either. Be like, hey, and there's a cat. Cool. Hi, cat. Welcome along, cat.
Fire hydrant.
Hey,
Boom.
look, here's a bird. Cool. Hey, bird. Boom. Sometimes I'll chase you. Sometimes I won't.
Okay, you're nasty-fying my example. I'm trying to make a point. Oh, no.
Yeah, but that's if you guys
into bestiality all of a sudden.
Listen, guys, if you guys recognize that, hey, there's this incredible diversity in the natural order, and within that diversity there is an underlying unity, then that's what we should expect to see here. And so when you have, this is going back to your systemic question, when you have a society in which all of a sudden these things that are unnatural dividers are being elevated, don't you have to assume that there is some sort of system that is underlying that?
Well, that's an assumption that some of us make, and I don't want to alienate people who I really want to understand that we love them, but here is an example where you had a Christian university that says, I love Jesus. Jesus loves people. Doesn't matter what you look like. Let's serve Christ together. And then you have a system, literally a system that comes in and says, despite your love of the gospel, you are not allowed to be integrated.
Right.
That is a fact. And so when people say, I see systemic racism in this world, I see there's a system in place, I think this is an example of historical facts that leads people to believe that says, well, here's an example of a system. Here's an example of a system. Whether or not that system is indeed to blame for everything we see in society or not is a whole nother discussion.
Right.
But going back to what you're saying about legitimizing, or even you just acknowledging, there are people who say there's a system that is hurting us.
Right.
And I think that if anybody out there is struggling with this idea of systemic racism and saying this is a bad idea, it's not real, maybe this is something that will help you to understand where they're coming from. Of saying, okay, I see what you mean. I see what you mean when you say this is a system that was built to do these things, because here is an example of a system that was built to do these things. I can disagree if it's still standing. I can disagree on the long-standing results of it, but you're not crazy or wrong to say that these are facts of history.
That it was there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's good.
Yeah. So continuing with that a little bit, you have, so page 136 and 137. It's looking at more.
You're jumping.
Was you dropping stuff? Okay.
I'm dropping.
Well, yeah, I'm jumping because see, I organized it by themes for each of these episodes. See, that's why I have different colors.
Okay.
It's color coded.
Oh yeah. Just wait till we get to the pink topic.
I have a feeling I know what that one is.
Right.
Just gonna go out on a limb here.
Oh, because did you get the pun?
He didn't. He missed it.
I wasn't paying. I saw your shirt, but I wasn't paying attention.
No, because
just forget I mentioned anything.
You guys will understand in 2 episodes. Okay. 136. Is the Negro human an American citizen, or is he an animal with only instinct? Right. And I think that's interesting, connected with, on top of 137, it seems paradoxical that the institution of slavery was built on social contact, which in its own way enabled masters to exercise a direct and personal control over slaves. Yet post-1865, social arrangements moved toward greater separation, segregation, and social distance. So you have this idea that they're struggling for the idea of humanity, of am I even human or not? Can I be seen as human? And I even put in my notes here, like this is still something to this day. I remember my mom would tell the stories when she was a little girl. She only recalled my grandfather crying, I think, twice. Once, actually, she wasn't even a little kid anymore. Once was at her grandmother's funeral. The only other time was one of the last marches, it might have been the last march the King did, with the
Memphis?
With the garbage workers.
Yeah, Memphis, yeah.
And they were marching, and she remembers seeing him crying because the signs they were carrying. I don't know if you're familiar with that march.
I am a man.
That was it. They were marching through, and that's all they said, I am a man. And she remembers seeing my grandfather crying, because here these men were on TV asserting their manhood.
Right.
That's a question that still is being asked when people seem like they're just losing their mind over the latest shooting or whatever. And they're like, why are they so upset? And it's like, because there's this chronic, constant struggle of are we people or are we not? Going back to Miss Ellen and some of her quotes. Like, are we really people or are we just
dark beast walking around in human form?
Exactly. And when you connect that with this idea of segregation and how there used to be this system where we were all together, dehumanized but together, and now you separate us, how I don't like quoting Barry or agreeing with Barry because I disagree with Barry on a lot of stuff, Wendell Berry. But he argues, he says...
I probably agree with him on more than you do.
You definitely do. But he has this idea that maybe if we had just stayed closer together, this racism thing would have gone away naturally. I don't agree with that premise, but I do agree that it's only hurt.
Like the Great Migration never happened? Or?
Yeah, he's actually opposed to the Great Migration. He said if all the black people just stayed in small communities and we all stayed small farmers,
we would have been easier targets.
Well, that's what we think.
Well, this is one of the key critiques of Wendell Berry, just on his broader thinking, is that it's too simplistic of an answer, right? So his solution to the problems with corporate farming are a bunch of small farmers. His solution to the racism, a bunch of small farmers, and I don't think we can boil his philosophy down that neatly.
Right.
But that is a criticism.
You haven't finished the book yet.
I have finished
after 500. I did. After 500 pages, that's pretty much what he gets down to.
It is what he gets down to, but it's got some nuance to it that we're missing here, Kamarr.
But my point I was getting at, where I do agree with Barry, is that I do think segregation definitely hurt that. You have a group of people who were fighting for their humanity and being told you're not human. Right. And then you separate them completely and say, and now we're going to put you off over there. We're going to be over here. There's not going to be any natural interaction. It only makes it even easier to dehumanize the people around you. It's one of those things that I think that he's right on, is that segregation, education, that was important. But I think bigger than that is that it really helped to solidify dehumanizing Black Americans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that proximity, the closeness can produce some friction. Yeah. But it can also produce a little bit better understanding. As long as somebody is at a step removed, I can't put myself in their shoes. I can't really imagine what life is like for them. I may not have to deal with some of the daily friction that comes from the differences. Right. But I will miss the opportunity to understand the similarities.
Yeah, I still don't know. I mean, you've got, large population of African Americans right here in Christian County, and I don't see the complete elimination of the way that the white Americans looked at African Americans here in Christian County. Yeah. So it seems like if that large congregation of African Americans was supposed to dispel those thoughts, then this would be a great proving ground for that.
Yeah. Except that it has largely been segregated. Like when he talks in this chapter about the Black-owned businesses, which were, they could welcome white clientele, right? But the reverse was not always true. Yeah. No. It's kind of like, here's this group has this.
Right. You can
clientele,
go here,
this mercantile, this one you can't go to. Yeah. And that segregation is the problem. The proximity was there, but there wasn't the common life. Yeah. There wasn't that common ground, a third space, there wasn't that public space,
which is what the church should have been.
Is what the church should have been. And that's been the point in this conversation is this is the church's opportunity now to, as best we can, try to address that and try to bring up the fact that, hey, when you let the society handle this conversation, we're probably not going to like the way it goes. Yeah. But if Christ's people would step up and if Christ's people would say, hey, here's the hope of the gospel brought to bear on this situation, it could change the narrative.
Yeah. And you look at the narrative today. We're two African-American guys, Caucasian guys sitting in a church, and we're diehard, I think, for a multi-ethnic church in a very diverse city that hasn't lived up to the diversity of its demographics. And so this is a point in history that we have not seen in this community, maybe ever. Yeah. Maybe. I mean, I know that things have changed, but you take the 60s, you take the fallout of that, the 80s, maybe there's been some semblance of what we see today, but I mean, we're at a better chance today in Christian County and Hopkinsville to see the church be the center or the magnetizing force for the coming together that we are hoping for.
Yeah. The sad thing, as I think too about that third space thing, like you mentioned, it's not that it hasn't existed in America; it's that it should have been the church and never really was. Because I think about music, like I've been listening to a different band for me, just some jazz music like that. I love jazz, but music is a great example of that, especially jazz. I mean, that has been a place where there's been a third space of the coming together of the ethnicities, where black people were even allowed to set the pace of the conversation, where it was a black-driven conversation within the jazz world, and white people were welcome, and you had integration taking place. You think about this, it's sad, but it's true. In bars have it. The sports have it, where you have this happening. So we've had it in America.
Not country music.
Well, it's starting to happen there too, a little bit more than it has in the past. I mean, there's reasons behind that, but actually, I saw a completely separate point. But I saw a post because I love bluegrass. I do.
Okay.
I mean, I love the banjo, and I saw a post where this guy was talking about decolonizing the banjo.
Wow.
Because the banjo actually is an instrument that was brought over by the African slaves from Africa. Like it has its roots in an African instrument, and so the banjo is actually a black instrument created by slaves. And so he's all about like decolonizing the banjo, and he's like sitting there playing banjo, doing like more African sounding music, and I'm like,
wow,
thank you, sir, because that is ours.
We need to decolonize okra.
I mean,
maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
Never mind.
I stick with music.
Yeah, there you go.
But I do think that is a dark spot on the church, especially in America, that this is what we were made for. We were made to give people Christ, free them from their sin, newness of life, unity like nobody else could ever understand. And we've not done that. We've preached the gospel about forgiveness of sin, newness of life, but we let it just, okay, but now go over there and worship and don't come over here.
Right. Yeah, in large part, it's been a gospel of you get to go to heaven when you die.
Yeah.
And that anemic understanding of the gospel is something that I find pastorally, Richard, Kamarr, I'm sure you guys would agree, has done a great deal of harm to any sort of discussion like this, any sort of attempt to say, the kingdom implications of the gospel are huge.
Right.
And the system that Jesus is seeking to establish, the kingdom that that we are supposed to be praying, make it here like it is there.
Right.
It's not just wait for heaven.
No, not at all.
And what we're doing is not just polishing the brass on the Titanic in working for societal change now. This is the kingdom work.
Yeah.
This is the task.
Wait, are you post-millennial now like me?
No, I am an optimistic amillennialist. I'm an optimistic amillennialist.
You started sounding a little post-millennial there for a second.
No. Let's no.
I mean, because I agree, the kingdom is here. Yes, we're supposed to establish it here on earth,
is now,
as it is in heaven. Like that's our mandate. Yeah.
Well, no, that's the omelet. That is a distraction, sir. We should not get into eschatology at this point. Oh my goodness, where do you stand on all that, Richard?
I sit in all of that.
Really committed, are you?
Exactly.
I want to. So you talk about skipping ahead. I do want to skip ahead to the end of the chapter now, because again,
wow, yeah, that's definitely skipping ahead.
I broke it off in kind of in themes. Okay, and so this one was really just mainly just touching on a little bit about segregation. I didn't want to talk so much about the educational system, because that comes up in the next chapter, really, when they start talking about desegregating and the implications on societies, when they really dig into some of the pains that they experienced. That's why I'm saving some of that for later.
Gotcha.
But this idea of systems that exist, and systems of establishing these differences. At the end of the chapter, he says recognizing in the post-Reconstruction decades a regression into social patterns of cruelty not exceeded by the slave regime, Paul Laurence Dunbar wrote of a South degraded by its postbellum racial practices. To paraphrase the poet, many of the events depicted in this chapter might best be described as a newer bondage and a deeper shame. Mm-hmm. So Dunbar, his famous poem, We Wear the Mask. And I don't know, like, was that a newer concept to you when you first read that? Had you encountered this idea of mask wearing from a minority standpoint?
I don't think it was new to me. I don't know that I've grasped it entirely because I haven't had to live it, but I don't think it was a new concept to me.
Yeah. So for anybody who's unfamiliar with it, this idea that Dunbar said, and it still is relevant to this day, is this the view of when the person is out in society and interacting with other people, they put on this mask, they put on this show. They're not going to be who they really are. They have a mask that they wear. And that is all of existence practically, unless they enter into their safe spaces. This is why, to me, the black church will always be an important historical thing. This is why I enjoyed going to an HBCU with all the other things that came with it, was that there were places where more or less safe places that say, okay, this is a place you don't have to wear the mask.
Right.
Because out there you always do.
Yeah.
And what he's saying here at the end of this chapter essentially is that this idea of mask wearing, this idea of separation and systems that are taking place, I think what's really controversial about it is that he's saying that cruelty not exceeded by the slavery regime. So in other words, this Jim Crow era that is now popping up and taking form, slavery was not worse than it. And that is a controversial statement to a lot of people, to say that the hundreds of years of being enslaved was not worse than the decades of Jim Crow law.
Yeah. Well, think about it. I mean, you for 270 years or whatever, you knew your place, right? You knew you couldn't look at the white man in the eye. You knew you couldn't flirt with the white woman. You couldn't do certain things, and you knew your place. And if you got out of your place, they had a system to take care of that. Now you've got these half freedoms, these fledgling rights, and you're supposed to seamlessly accommodate into this new reality that is new for everyone. Yeah. And it's like, can I really be me? It's like, I used to have these shirts that said, I'm unapologetically black.
Yeah.
And I imagine if I'm not familiar with that, then that would be completely weird. But that goes back to that dichotomy. Can I really be authentically me, or do I have to be the assimilated version of me to fit into your society and your norms that doesn't begrudging you, that doesn't make you, flinch when I walk by?
Which is why our family has shirts that my mom got them for for my dad, myself, and all of her grandsons. Our shirt actually says "Danger." Positive, educated black man.
Just a warning in case you didn't.
Because that's how our family is instead.
Right.
And actually, first got a shirt like that when I was still in high school. It was the first time I got one of them. So we bought another because I outgrew it. So we got them for the whole family a few years back. Because of that same idea that it's more like, okay, I realize that this is actually a dangerous thing because this would be me not wearing a mask.
Yeah.
This is me saying, warning, no mask here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Venture forward with caution. That's a dangerous thing.
It can be. People don't know how to take that. I mean, you think about the first generation to see an empowered black race that freely would go to the other side of the town, set up shop, set up a law office, a doctor's office, a dental office, to run for office unapologetically and not have to kowtow or cower in the face of white paternity, which is something we've talked about a lot too. Imagine if white paternity had no power.
Yeah. Or did not have unequal power.
Right.
It didn't have more power than other ethnicities did in the situation.
Imagine if those old things didn't work anymore. Yeah. I mean, that's the fear of losing power does a lot of things to a lot of people. And we've seen that throughout history. The fear of losing power causes anger and rage to emerge even more, which makes even the society that has now been created more volatile and not knowing how to handle that, which might go back to some of these fears of maybe that is worse because now I don't know what to do.
We have a show we're working on finishing up, my wife and I. I'm not going to say what it is because a lot of people will be like, I can't believe you watched that show and you're a pastor.
I can't believe you watched that show and you're a pastor. There, I said it, Kamarr.
But in the show, it largely takes place in the 60s, and this father character, he's wrestling with feeling his own sense of failure in his life. And he's talking to these other guys, and it's all centers around his daughter. And he gives this beautiful soliloquy where he talks about, I poured into my son. I poured into him. I took him to work with me. I gave him every opportunity. We sat and we said, let's dream about what you're going to be when you grow up. And he's like, and I never did that with my daughter. He said, and now I look, and my son, my daughter's amazing. She's got all this talent and ability, and she's so strong. She's gone through all these heartaches and difficulties in these last few years, and she's come out like this new person. She's been amazing. And he's like, and I fear that maybe this isn't a new her. This is who she's always been, and I just never saw it. I never recognized it. Who would she be had I actually nourished her and nurtured her the way I did my son? Who might she be today if I had seen that in her and recognized that in her? Maybe our whole lives we've been doing this all wrong, and I missed it. And I think that's really part of the question we're having about this is like a lot of people will say, well, what if? Like maybe this is a problem. Maybe it is where we're focusing so much energy on one group of people and not another. And what would happen if we gave them the same or just didn't give the other people extra? What would it look like? What would it look like if the playing field was level? I mean,
we don't even know what that looks like because the people who decide what the playing field looks like would be biased.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you're saying that, I'm thinking about the current debates about history and what should history be taught and what level should it be taught and, who decides what history should look like and feel like and be like. And how can you make that level?
Yeah.
How can you make that equal in proportion to what it should be and versus what it is?
The only way I know is through Christ.
Amen.
That's why I love that we're doing this, but that's why also sometimes other people might say, man, Kamarr, you seem really frustrated with the church. Yeah, I am. And I can be as a pastor. I'm allowed to be. I'm on the inside. But I am because it's like, man, this is our job.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? I look at that with great joy. This is our job. We get to, and I don't know about you guys, but for me, I get excited about being, I don't know what the word is. I'm trying to think of a big smart word like the precipice. We get to stand in this position in history, and we get to help lead a body of people in society to places that society has never been to before.
Yeah,
right.
It's like Star Trek, to boldly go where no one has gone before. That's fun.
Yeah,
to me, that's exciting. I mean, everything that we're talking about, this is just helping to set the ground, the atmosphere for the kingdom of God in heaven coming to earth and being like it is in heaven right here in Hopkinsville.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's exciting to me.
Yeah.
You're a visionary. You are a visionary. You're an entrepreneur. That kind of stuff is thrilling. Yeah. For me, what thrills me about this is the most exciting thing for me is when I see light bulbs coming on. When I see somebody turn the corner and all of a sudden something they haven't understood, they haven't got, all of a sudden,
yeah,
that right there is so good.
Yeah.
And it's my hope that in this conversation, in every time I'm opening the Bible on a Sunday morning or a Wednesday night, my hope is that that's what's happening.
Yeah.
Is that somewhere light bulbs coming on. Normally the light bulb is mine.
Yeah.
Have y'all done that? You've been teaching, you've been preaching, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa. And that's that is so cool to me.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be overly simplistic in this because we've talked before. This is a very complex topic. We're dealing with a very complex situation. We live in a very complex world.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But so many times the light bulb comes on for me when I quit looking at the problem and I start looking at Jesus.
Yeah.
Or when I look at the problem through the lens of Jesus.
Right.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, now it makes sense.
Right.
And I think that as much as we can as the church, we could point to the craziness in the world and we could say, hey, guys, the reason this doesn't work and the reason why you're so divided right now is because you're not looking at this through Jesus.
Yeah,
that's good.
You're missing it because you don't have that right lens to look at things.
I will say, talking about what excites us about this moment, and all, it's when I hear about other people talking about are people responding to this. Like when I went and one of my friends said, like, hey, yeah, I got this lady working for me, and she says you're talking about racism and white people and black people. It's like, so she's actually talking about it at work.
Right.
Wow.
She's going and she's engaging in these conversations with other people. Great. I mean, she might misquote me here and there, but it's all right.
Right.
Because they're having the conversation. Or when other people come to us and say, hey, Kamarr, I was talking with so-and-so about this, and this is what we were saying about it. What do you think? Like that's what gets me excited, because it's like, okay, you're not relying on it being, we have to be in the conversation for it to be had.
Right.
Because to me, that's the goal. I mean, we talk about this as ministry, right? It's like working ourselves out of a job.
Right.
Yes.
You should get to the point where you have the Spirit, you have Christ, you have His Word. You don't need me per se.
Right.
I mean, yes, there's the role of pastor, but you're out there doing ministry.
You got the body.
Right.
You got the body taking up the work of the ministry.
Yeah.
That's right.
The pastors.
Ephesians 4:12.
Yes.
Exactly. So when I see that and I hear that they're doing that and none of us are in the conversation, They're just engaged in conversation and wrestling with it themselves in society. Like, yes, that's the goal. Like, is for you to go out and do it.
Come on.
For me to be irrelevant.
That's right.
I mean, that's
we can
the
play
idea.
the banjo and eat okra.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But decolonized banjo and okra.
Yeah, because that's tastier.
Hey, if the okra is fried, I'm there.
I
I have yet to try any other kind of okra that I like.
That's that colonized okra though.
That's that colonized okra. Cornmeal.
I will take your decolonized banjo, but I am keeping my colonized okra.
I don't know. I would say deep fried in grease. That's the decolonization process.
No, because see, you missed the talk they did over at the museum. But when I forget the guy's name, he's a local physician.
Yeah.
He was talking about Nigerian food. Mm-hmm. Like they don't
fry it.
Fried's not an African thing generally.
We need to bring.
Well, whoever came up with it, I'm grateful.
We need to bring hope to Africa.
Like we didn't do our ancestors when they were still over there didn't do a lot of fried anything.
Man.
Like when you just think about it agriculturally, you realize you're right. Yeah, how would
almost
you
had a
how would you
DeSantis
have the oil
moment
to
for a
fry?
minute.
Like
Almost.
I almost had a DeSantis moment. Maybe there was some. I'll stop there.
Yeah, better stop.
Better stop.
I think we might get ourselves in trouble if we keep up on this.
Yeah.
I thought we already got in trouble. What? So last open-ended thing before we close out this episode, just focusing more on this issue of segregation. Have you guys ever like really encountered that educationally or in your life? Or with your kids, it's segregation. I mean, I know your schools aren't segregated. Well, I guess yours is at home. Your home school.
Mine's about as segregated as they can get.
Your kids go to an all-white school. So
They do.
Yeah.
Every day.
But your kids go to an 100% integrate school.
My school is the most diverse school in this county.
I don't know
No
about
doubt.
the most diverse in the
think
county.
it is.
Everybody is
something.
everybody's mixed though.
Yes, everyone, all of them.
There's no mono-ethnic people in your school.
No.
See, that's not diverse. For you guys, they're both homeschoolers, okay? Their kids are
Yes.
homeschooled.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
that's why I'm saying this about them. But
I appreciate that clarification there because that could have come out
I realized that
wrong.
might be
That's
necessary for you guys.
Yes.
Might be too much. Now, what was your question?
But I mean, the idea of experiencing this idea of segregation in the school system personally at all, because I mean, like I know that I've experienced it. I know even though I'm from Southern California, I was always like the only person who looked like me in my classes. Schools I went to, I even went to a separate school when we were in Huntington Beach, the last school I went to, because I had to go off to the school where all the gifted kids were.
Yeah.
So it was even further segregated.
Gotcha.
And so I've experienced that. I've seen that color line, and then even working in the school system here, when I was working in the public school, I could see like my honors classes did not have as many people of color as my non-honors classes. That started changing towards like my last year there. I think it was partly because you recommend and because I carried over from one year to the next, and I was kind of rocking the system a little bit on who I recommended for honors courses. But I saw that even there of the segregation of honors versus non-honors, or in the school system here in the public schools.
Yeah.
Certain schools are more brown than others here in Hopkinsville. That's just the facts. But I was wondering, do you guys have any experience with that, of dealing with segregation, of seeing that?
Well, I can tell you when I grew up in a very, very small rural town and county in West Tennessee, rural West Tennessee. And when I grew up, I can just give you the example that I had when I grew up. All of the African American and poor white kids were put in what they called Chapter 2. These were these, like slow programs, like all the kids were in that. And when I went home one day and I told my mom, she's like, how was school? This was at the beginning of a school year. I said, I'm in Chapter 2. She's like, why? And all I remember is the next day she went to school, she yelled at some people, and I got out of that. But I remember my cousins, they stayed in it. Yeah. And throughout the rest of their scholastic career in elementary, middle school, and high school, they were always in classes that were not academically challenging.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that was just the prejudice that they had, but that was the prejudice that was perceived.
Yeah. Yeah. What about you? I mean, I know that you were, full disclosure, he was homeschooled as well. So there's that.
Yeah. So, but my mom was a public school teacher.
Yeah.
Up until I think 5th grade is when I started homeschooling. But I don't recall really seeing segregation. But again, I was in Oregon, and as you guys taught me several weeks ago, months ago, however long that's been, like there was a reason.
Did we tell people that? Do they know? I mean, we talked about it, but
I don't recall what we said in the episode.
I think we said it. We mentioned something to the effect in the episode about that.
They didn't like black people in Oregon.
Oregon apparently Yeah, didn't like black people.
Yeah.
So that was just my context in public school. I didn't see it. I didn't know it. When I got to Idaho, I was homeschooled, but I played sports in public school teams, and there it was less African American versus Caucasian, and more you had a lot of Hispanic families that had come in to do agricultural work or whatever.
Yeah.
And so their kids were part of the same soccer team that I was in, and it was never an issue that I saw.
That you saw in sports arena. Because like I said,
in the sports arena, exactly. That's one of those. Integrating. And so that was my only experience.
When you say you didn't see segregation, like when you were in Oregon, was it in the sense that you didn't notice it, or like were there people of color in your classes integrated? Like
no.
And so
that's what I'm saying. Like it wasn't there to see.
It wasn't that there was no segregation. It's that you didn't see that it was there.
I didn't even know it was a thing. There.
Well, I mean, I think I wanted to clarify that because that is a very common experience. I was telling my wife, we've been together now 22 years. So most of her life now, she has been with a black person. Mm-hmm. So her way of viewing things is different.
Right.
I mean, it's hard for her to remember what it was like viewing the world as a white person who saw things only from the white perspective.
Right. Mm-hmm.
She's forgotten a lot of that. And so she's less patient than she should be, I think, sometimes with her fellow white people. But that is a relevant thing, is that you were there and you were in a fully segregated society and you didn't see it. While we talk about this, like if I walk into a room of that sort,
I start counting.
I can't not see it. Like it's like, oh man, this is right here.
And I'll tell you what, when I went to Montana one time on a camping trip, we flew into Spokane, Oregon. Was it Spokane, Washington?
I was going to say
Washington. We drove across the tip of Idaho into Montana, and I counted 7 black people in 3 states over a week.
Yeah,
wow.
That's.
I think you found like 7 of the 10 that are in North Idaho, man.
And one of them was a black family, and we thought we saw like a ghost or something. We're like, what is going on here?
Yeah, where were we at? Was that Poland? I think that was in Poland, where my wife was counting the black people.
You guys do that too?
I don't. And just, apparently, this is something I missed out on.
I remember it because we would be in conversations. Like we'd be in conversations. We were talking about stuff, and we're like blah blah blah, and then Laura would just be like 12. and they were like, what's that? I'm like, just ignore my wife. Don't worry about it.
That's awesome.
But I think that's just something relevant to say.
Secret things black people do.
Right. I mean, but it is I think this is a fallout and a reality of segregation that is just maybe to help people understand when people say systemic racism, when they talk about segregation, they talk about what they see versus what you see. Sometimes it is something that you just don't see until you're taught to see it.
Right.
You don't see. And so I just would challenge and encourage people to listen. Like you were saying about, legitimizing the pain. And I get what you were saying too, Brandon, but like, I don't know if I want to say legitimize it because they might not be right to feel that pain. But I would say that it's always right to listen.
Yes.
It's always right to listen. Yes. And even if they're making up the pain.
And it's
listen
not my
and acknowledge.
Right. I don't think it's my right to say that they shouldn't feel that pain.
Exactly. I get that. This is also a beautiful thing, just so you guys see too. We don't always agree on everything. We very rarely agree on everything. But I do think that we can all agree that somebody says they're hurting, listen. Amen. Don't yell back. Don't get defensive.
Yes. Right.
Listen. Just listen. And you might find out that there's something there you never knew.
Right.
And I promise you, learning is always awesome. Like, some people say ignorance is bliss. No, ignorance is an accident waiting to happen. It really is.
Who said the unexamined life is not worth living?
Yeah.
I don't remember who said that one, but
I've heard that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some dead dude.
Pretty sure he was an atheist too.
Probably.
Was that guy?
But nonetheless, I think he can be right on that. Because I do think life is worth examining.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna end it here.
Okay.
And then we're gonna pause for a second. You guys are gonna see the pause. Well, I guess you guys have a week pause. And then we're going to pick up because we're going to also cover in chapter 4, we're going to talk about my least favorite historical black leader, Booker T. Washington.
Booker T.
I'm going to do my very best to...
He's a great wrestler.
I think this is a more sympathetic read on Washington than you're giving it credit for.
That was a very sympathetic read on him.
Yeah,
it's just that I don't like him at all. So, so there's that. So we're going to talk about him. And then we're going to talk about lynching. We're going to talk about violence.
Awesome.
Because these are also things that are in this big chapter.
Not the word that I would have used to it.
It's one of my favorite topics.
Right.
I mean... So look forward to hearing why this black man loves talking about lynching. And this white guy's going to sit in the middle feeling awkward about the whole thing.
As if I haven't through 7 or 8 episodes already, Kamarr.
Lynching brought this country a lot further than people.
Oh my goodness, we're stopping now. We will see you guys next time.
The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this podcast are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of any institution, organization, or corporation. The material and information presented here are for general information purposes only. All persons who participated did so of their own free will and speak for themselves only, regardless of any personal affiliations they may possess. Been Pastoring Through Some Hard Times is a production of Salt.Light.Love Ministries, all rights reserved.